Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bytes Brew. I'm Terry McGraw from Cape Endeavors Incorporated, and today I am joined by the distinguished Mr. Cole French from Kratos. He is the Director of Cybersecurity Services for Kratos. Thanks for joining us, Cole. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate the opportunity to come on, and hopefully this will be informative and useful for folks out there.
Yeah, and my conversation with you almost always are. In fact, they always are. You have a wealth of experience, not only consulting, but particularly for the CMMC space and the DIB. But before we get into sort of the CMMC specific stuff, I wanted to talk about. I thought there was an interesting development that happened, I guess, early last week or maybe the week before, when the GSA just decided to crap out an entirely new adjacent standard to the CMMC program. And I don't know, like CMMC convoluted. It was going sort of off 801.71. It required third-party attestation, but did not follow the same programmatics or the same threshold standards, et cetera. And I don't know. I've heard rumor that they've done an announcement or a deviation or suspension or something. I don't know if that's true. Do you have any insight into that? As I know you guys are a third-party assessing organization for or a PAO, I guess I should say.
Yeah, we are a FedRAMP 3 PAO. So we took a look at it, reviewed it, and we actually, similar to what you just described. It was kind of a convoluted mess of different requirements that were kind of adjacent to CMMC, but also, a little bit, a good bit different, I think. And we did reach out to GSA to get some clarification and try to get some understanding on, what the intent was and clarify some of the the issues that we saw that you kind of alluded to. And they didn't address anything specifically as far as, our specific questions, but they did note that they're going to issue a revision or an update to the framework, I guess we'll call it. So we're kind of standing by waiting to see what they reissue. My suspicion is they probably got a lot of feedback similar to what we gave.
Like
we did offer.
What the hell?
Yeah. We did offer to take a look at. They mentioned templates, and we offered to take a look at those, and provide feedback, things like that. They didn't take us up on that, so we're just kind of waiting to see what they come up with, what they come back with, and hopefully it'll be clearer and better.
They didn't formally rescind it though, so it is actually a requirement right now. And like I have some really large customers that are both big in the DIB and do a lot of business with GSA. Or on the GSA schedule, et cetera. And so they have requirements for both. And now they're like, what do I do? Because there's only how many less than 100 3 PAOs, and you've got 300 some odd thousand GS, or maybe a million. It's some ungodly amount of GSA companies, and they gave a requirement to have it done by July. Like, is there a time machine we're unaware of? Like, how the hell is, like, even if we were going to do this as ill planned and as ill conceived as it is, there's no way the market could do this. Part of me was thinking maybe they're just looking to drive companies out of the GSA schedule, and this is a way to do it. I don't know. So are you advising your clients? We have some mutual clients, by the way. And so I just wanted to, we're going to guide them towards, hey, you might as well just knock out yet another assessment. Or are we saying, let's just wait a few weeks to see what happens?
I think we're taking more of the wait and see approach and telling folks that, essentially what I just told you, but at the same time, I think we've said this a lot with CMMC, right? A lot of the requirements are things that if you're on the GSA schedule or if you have contracts, you should be doing most of these things as it is, right? So a sort of screwed up framework notwithstanding, you should be doing the majority of those requirements as it is. So kind of emphasizing that, but also, taking a wait and see approach. And we'll see what GSA comes back with.
Well, yeah, as you know, I'm a huge advocate of not complaining about the standards that are being applied because, like, again, we should all be doing it. What I think I'm taking umbrage to, and probably our customer base is yet another assessment. To a kind of to an unknown set of standards at this point. I mean, how am I being? What's my criteria? We know what the criteria evaluation standards are for CMMC in the 800 171, but no such like assessor checklist, if you will. They have some incredibly unrealistic notification timelines, like an hour notification. It seems like, so I think that by the way, the assessment that's being required, is there an equivalency? Like one of my customers just literally got done with an assessment for CMMC at level 2. So you're saying that we have to pay for separate assessment, or are they going to say yes, that's like in kind? We don't know. I mean, so those are the things I think that yes, I agree with you. The security standards are absolutely where we should be, but the administrative burden and the cost of this is associated. I mean, if we heard a bunch of bitching about CMMC, we're really going to hear a lot of bitching about having duplicative standards and assessments.
So we didn't get any indication from our communications with GSA as to what their thinking was on that. I mean, it seems like they would take that, reciprocity essentially. In any organization that's CMMC certified, would essentially, meet the GSA framework requirements. We did have some conversations with the Cyber AB actually about this, or I should say the Cyber AB mentioned it in a recent forum, and it sounds like the framework took them by surprise a little bit. They weren't really aware of it either, and then they don't have any intentions of creating any sort of reciprocity from a CMMC standpoint, right? So, GSA, they may say, okay, CMMC certification counts, or we have reciprocity with this, but it sounds like Cyber AB and on the CMMC side, they don't intend to have any sort of reciprocity. So if you go get this GSA certification, or whatever they're going to end up calling it, it's not going to, grandfather you in for CMMC. So to your point about duplicative standards, in some way, shape, or form, we're definitely going to end up with some sort of duplicative standard for a certain set of contractors, right? Just to be determined on what that's actually going to look like, and even what the GSA framework, frankly, is going to look like, when it's all said and done.
Look, I'm a huge believer in making sure that we're reducing, nation state espionage and threats to cybercrime and data loss. As a taxpayer and as a former soldier, I take them very seriously. But like I've said, that the existential threat to the CMMC program is probably two things. One, we have more demand than ability to fill that signal. And I'm afraid that creates a downward pressure for people to rubber stamp things. And so I don't want this to become a rubber stamp, pay to play kind of thing where you just pay, someone stamps it and you move on. I think that loses the intent of CMMC. But when you do things like GSA did, now where you have the government screaming for multiple standards, they're not coordinated, they're duplicative. The argument that was made by big defense contractors of like, the government is not in a good place to provide, this kind of oversight to us. We're better able to do this in the commercial market, et cetera, et cetera. I don't agree with that, but when you get this level of schizophrenia on the federal government side, it adds to the argument that this is a farce, right? And so I don't know. We've done a lot of work to try to make the CMMC a real thing with real standards and make an impact, driving people to do the right thing. And this kind of, ass clownery just doesn't, it just undermines everything. And I hope someone in the GSA hears me, because it is just so ill. It was ill conceived, ill planned, and ill thought out. And it just does not nest well. And unless that was the intent, unless they wanted to create this kind of, drive everybody out of the market and start over again, maybe, but who knows? Anyway.
I think your use of the term schizophrenia is a good, that kind of, I was thinking earlier, I'm like, how do I describe this in like a way that makes sense? And I think that's a good term for this. And to your point, I know we'll get into more of like the challenges with CMMC and stuff like that, but one of the things we're seeing is you have all these frameworks already, right? Like, so that already exists. And to your point about it kind of becoming a farce, I think one of the challenges we've seen with some organizations that have multiple frameworks that they're working with, they try to take this sort of one size fits all approach, and it works like 80-90% of the time, but you end up with these like 10 to 20% of requirements that require some nuance, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just creates a lot of challenges assessing it. It's difficult for them to really tell the story of how they're implementing it. So I think we're missing out. I
mean, you got like, okay, let's just say they're serious, and there's a quarterly reporting requirement, right? So you got this assessment thing that's going on, but there's a quarterly requirement to report into the GSA and your compliance. Who the hell in the GSA is going to be staffed to read 1 million reports every quarter? I mean, I don't even, like, I'm staggered by the level of either hubris or incompetence. I haven't decided which one, right? Like, I like, this is just so ill-conceived. It's almost embarrassing. But anyway, that said, I'm making my thoughts very, very clear on it. Again, it undermines both programs.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't seek to strengthen either one anyway. But pivoting a little bit to the CMMC program, because that's really kind of where we both our companies focus at, and our efforts are really concentrated. We've been in a year or two of assessing now. I mean, you all have done joint surveillance, and you've done assessments. You've done a fair number, probably one of the larger numbers of assessments. Based on that experience, now that we're kind of settling into a groove and we're settling into kind of a rhythm in the industry, if you will, things are evening out with cyber AB. We're getting more, uniform training and throughput, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are you kind of seeing in the trends? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they both? I mean, what are you kind of seeing as far as sort of the success of the program itself?
Yes, I think in general, it's trending in a positive direction. I do think the biggest challenge that we're facing, and really there's a few different manifestations of this, but it's kind of one single challenge, and it's the in any system, even done well, you can map out all the requirements, you can build it, you can deliver it, but when you don't really know what you're getting into until it's actually out there and you have users and consumers working with it. And I think that's a lot of where we are now. Granted, a lot of the issues that we're facing were things that have been brought up for a long time. But really, it's just, there's a lot of nuance and clarification that's still required within the framework. And interestingly, I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing, and I think it's been here since the beginning, or it has been here since the beginning, but it's been more recent in terms of it being brought up and it being voiced louder and louder. And that's, we built CMMC as a security framework, but for use in procurement. And so those two things don't necessarily always go together, right? Because
that's a great point, by the way.
Yeah. So the security is to be implemented and assessed on an information system, but that information system can be used, in a single business entity, across multiple business entities. There can be complicated business entity relationships as it relates to that information security, or as it relates to that information system. So we get in this place where we're, uploading everything to EMAS against all these different cage codes, or maybe not as many cage codes. But then we find out later, there was all these other cage codes we forgot to include, or we didn't include, or can we include? And then after assessment's over, some of these businesses that, are more fluid and they're always acquiring other entities, things like that. Now all of a sudden they're asking questions like, well, I got my assessment against these 6 cage codes, but I just bought this other business. And we're not making any changes to the system. We're just bringing all their people in to use our system. So the system that we assessed hasn't changed. It has new users, but that's an operational change. But we can't make any changes to their cage code structure. So from a procurement perspective, they have issues now because they have cage codes that aren't covered with their certification. So I think kind of the mismatch between those two things has become a major issue, particularly as we've completed assessments and now some of these assessed organizations are wanting to potentially make changes.
Yeah, we've seen that, especially with large global conglomerates where M&A happens all the time. They'll have all these, orphaned cage codes. And although they like to leverage the same infrastructure until they get the legal entities aligned and get the cage codes aligned, it becomes problematic. But that does bring up another good point. And I've read some articles online that seem to be FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Some of my competitors have stated that if you change an ESP, you have to be reassessed. And we're arguing that that's absolute nonsense. In fact, the language, states that, like, if your external service provider changes, that if nothing else in your environment changes, the mere fact that I've got another provider does not force a reassessment. Do you share that view? Is there a nuance to that we're not aware of? But I mean, I think people are using that as a way to try to hijack people into staying with them, or to maintain a churn. But I find that kind of behavior kind of reprehensible, right? I mean, tying someone to you, through either misrepresentation or threat of obviating a control, I think is ridiculous. But anyway, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would agree with you that ESP, just changing your ESP on the surface would not necessarily require a reassessment. And just to the reassessment question in general, going back to what I was saying before, talk about something that's like, we just decided we're going to leave this open-ended and vague as to what requires a reassessment. So you have like 1,001 different opinions out there as to what requires a reassessment. So to your point, all this, it creates opportunities for people to use whatever they want, right? And the ESP, the example you gave, it's like, well, you have a contract with us, and if you replace us, then it's going to put your assessment at risk. And I don't think, if I don't make any changes to my system, but I hire a different person, or a different organization with different individuals to come in and assist and help, that doesn't constitute a reassessment. That would be an operational change. Now, if I'm taking that ESP systems, removing them from my overall system and bringing in a new ESP that's going to be using new systems, then I think you can make an argument a reassessment might be required in that scenario. But as a general rule, just bringing in a new ESP or switching your ESP, they're just providing a service. It doesn't change anything to you as it relates to your information system necessarily.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll get some clarifying guidance on that as well.
Same.
Especially, and this is it kind of goes hand in hand. So on one hand, the contractual and procurement kind of obligations that are inspecting, your adherence to 800-171 and the DFARS, and then the submission of the SPRS score, that is we're using procurement as a way to drive better security behaviors. I've already annotated. As you articulated earlier, we have the procurement's driving security and vice versa. But what we also see is what would normally be treated as a contractual problem, meaning you're not adhering to the standards of the contract, so we're gonna suspend your contract or not renew your contract or take some other contractual action against you as a DoD or a federal government. But what we're seeing in our I won't say the customer base, I'll say we're seeing in the community, the Department of Justice getting in with the False Claims Act. In fact, I did a podcast with Zach Torliger from Vincent and Elkins, and it was very eye-opening because that's a really serious thing to have happened to you as a company. And it does seem, because so just for everyone's edification in the audience, like these are key TAM, meaning they're whistleblower actions or the government could be the whistleblower themselves, but more often than not, it's an insider who is a whistleblower, which generates an action that DOJ says we need to investigate that, and hence they issue the CID. So now we have what it is, although considered a civil matter, it can be criminal, but most of them are civil, but they still have the weight of the federal government, and they're punitive, right? I mean, these have heavy costs that not only answer and defend, but to even eventually overcome. And so it is a strange dichotomy where you've got a procurement apparatus driving security, But then you've also got the Department of Justice going, there's a false claim because you're not handling CUI correctly, right? Or you misrepresent your SPRS score. So you told the government in this contractual mechanism that you're a 110. We know you're not at a 110, or you misrepresented yourself to the government, and now the CID is coming because of a whistleblower, and this adds a layer of severity that just the contract alone doesn't. And I don't think that the community is aware that these CIDs are ramping up, or at least they appear to be ramping up, right? And they are crushingly expensive to adjudicate. Anyway, are you seeing that kind of, is there other musings in your environment that kind of correspond with what we're seeing?
I would say, yeah, consistent with what you're saying, that people are really hung up on the procurement side of it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing that people is forefront, at the forefront of their minds. It's what they're working from. It's what they're trying to meet so they can, but they're not really, it's more of it's very binary, right? It's like, well, I need this so that I can have the work. And if I don't have it, then my contracts are in jeopardy. The false claims side of it, it doesn't seem to be, at least in our conversations and the folks we're working with, it's not something that's brought up terribly often. We've had a few folks bring it up and actually acknowledge that, this False Claims Act is out there, is a risk, and they want to make sure, they follow everything and do everything properly, because not only do they want to meet their contractual requirements, but they also want to avoid any sort of false claims. But I do think there is, the two are not connected in a real way, which I think is what you're alluding to. So I think we've driven this so hard as a procurement thing, and the false claims thing has just been kind of in the background, and you hear stories every once in a while and stuff like that. But I think it still falls under, most people have, I think, just making an assumption on my part, but they have it's not going to happen to me kind of thing, right? They don't, it's just the story I hear in the news that happens to other organizations, other people. And I think we're so inside an organization, you can be so close to what's going on that you maybe have an ignorance, if you will, to a potential false claim or somebody blowing the whistle on something. Because even some of these whistleblower stories that I've read, when reading about them, and I haven't gone into like a ton of depth with them necessarily, but reading them, it's like, man, that's stuff I could see happening at any organization. It doesn't seem necessarily like, just rampant malfeasance or anything like that. So to your point,
that's the challenge, right? And here's the other issue that we see. Like, I mean, this is a historical look back in a lot of cases, right? I mean, and so you had this very nascent program. You've had changes, where the DFARS was articulating you need to adhere to 800-171, but CMMC didn't really fully sort of bake out and didn't even go live till recently. So you have this very ambiguous gray area, from the 2018 period to 2025, right? And so, and it does seem that the government seems to be focused on that gray area, which I think is a little unfair, actually. So I'm all about adhering to standards, make sure we're secure, make sure we're doing what we're saying we're doing. But, there is a lot of ambiguity in there that there was. And so, and the definitions of standards and how, just because I read the 800-171, I may fully believe that I am actually meeting all of that intent, right? And, what needed to be in the SSP and to what degree, and did I need to, what constitutes the SSP in a very ill-defined arena. So I think some of this stuff, the problem is the money to defend yourself against this. And I although maybe well-intentioned, it becomes, an existential threat to the business when you're looking at, the fines, the potential disbarment, legal fees, just paying for the legal defense for this, not to mention the data gathering. It's exorbitant. And so, whereas I applaud the government for wanting to hold people accountable, it just seems like the period of time they're focusing on is the most ambiguous area to do so. All right. I mean, and again, I don't think it is in a lot of cases willful intent. I think it's, and oh, by the way, most companies have so much turnover. Like, how many companies, since 2018 have the same employees, that are there? It's a minority that stay for that length of time. I mean, in the tech industry in particular, we have a turnover. And so, how the hell you're going to hold me accountable from someone submitted in 2018, because I'm a company, but like I don't know what they were thinking when they employ. I mean, like, so it is very, in some respects, I know the intent, but it seems a little unfair in its applicability, or I said its application rather. So,
and I mean, just to kind of, I guess, pose a question to you in that regard, since you work a lot with this, is the application as broad for every single instance, right? So it doesn't matter what the false claim or what the whistleblower action is. Is the response exactly the same no matter what?
Yeah. Well, the key TAM, or the person bringing the whistleblowing, there's a few I don't know, slight moral or ethical dilemmas here. Whereas the government wants insiders to blow the whistle, and they need to encourage people. Like if I'm witnessing wrongdoing and I believe my company's doing something wrong by the American taxpayer, I should be able to whistleblow and not have any repercussion from company. And I should be protected. And I agree with that. The problem is, on the other hand, they've incentivized whistleblowers with a financial take in what the government gets back and claims. And that can be substantial. And so, whereas you want to incentivize people to come forward and take the risk, and there is, the risk of even retribution under the table, like maybe it's not overt, but et cetera. And so you want to give somebody a financial means to still want to come forward. The problem is, though, you get people, who knows? I call it now brings into suspect what they're whistleblowing on, and is it real or is it imagined? Is it perceived? The problem, because let's assume it's not legitimate. It could be a disaffected employee. It could be someone that just didn't have the whole picture, someone who didn't understand the standards that they said wasn't being met. It doesn't matter, because the government comes at this and says, I need all of your information from these 4 years, everything. And we'll figure out what's relevant. Right now, think about that from the receiving company. The DOJ doesn't care. They're like, we got a legitimate inquiry. We think it may have water. Give me everything. And then, so now, like, even if you didn't hire like the best attorneys out there, like Vincent and Elkins are like, they're the people. I have no financial coordination with them. I just think they're the best when it comes to this. They do a lot of this work. But if you try to like avoid getting counsel, and I'm going to play nice with the government, and I'm going to see if I can answer this without having to get a bunch of lawyers involved, you'll quickly find that you can't. The ask will be so broad and to a degree ambiguous, and interpretation, and what will satisfy the government, and you're like, where the heck do I even get all this information? If you don't have someone who knows how this process unfolds, and the legal implications down the road, and helps to narrow the government scope, and helps to put it back in the box a little bit, and to provide justification. I mean, like, if you would literally create yourself, if you tried to answer this without a legal representation, it's like representing yourself on a murder charge, right? I mean, like, it's not advisable for anybody to do so. So now you've got to go retain lawyers, and good lawyers are expensive. And it's going to take a long time to defend yourself against this. These things in some cases have stretched out years. And if you're looking at, billable hours at $1,500 an hour, whatever the hell it is, I don't know. Like that alone, in combination with the potential fees. And then God forbid, if you go through all that and you still lose, and now you've got, fines and damages and potentially a disbarment. Right. And so this is nothing to mess with whatsoever. And in some respects, it's a little unfair in its application. It really is. Are there some that deserve it and have misrepresented themselves? Yes. The problem is, from the government perspective, you don't know until you do the investigation, right? And so the innocent and the guilty still have the burden of defending themselves against the accusation. And so it's really problematic in the community right now.
And it sounds like the way the government approaches it basically is, like you kind of alluded to, kind of a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. Give us everything, and we'll figure it out. Which, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but also I think that creates a ton of risk. And to your point about it being unfair, Yeah, absolutely. Because not every false claim or not every whistleblower action is
Mhm.
necessarily the same thing. So to treat them all kind of as one size fits all
And
is sort of
and
inherently unfair.
yeah, well, and the average person does not know the nuance and legal argument, like, behind the willful intent or I mean, like they sound like they're part of the English lexicon, which they are, but in legal terms, they have nuance, right, and how it's applied. And the average person, like I consider myself to be smarter than the average cat. I'm deluding myself, but I know well enough to know that I have no idea how the government interprets that language. And like, I still think it's like, doing brain surgery on yourself. Yeah. Like if God forbid anybody ever did that to our company, the first person I would be calling would be Vincent and Elkin saying, help.
Right.
But again, and so now you've got the CMMC burden. That's not burden. Like I keep saying that. And I don't mean, I actually am a big supporter of CMMC in making people show their homework. But it's supposed to be driving good behavior, and not used as a sledgehammer against people who, like 6 years ago may have done something that was born out of ignorance. I think, punishing the current set for something that may not even be in place anymore is, it's a little bit, the scales of justice are a bit wonky in this regard. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah. To your point about, and I guess maybe this is like on the other side of it, right? We talk about, risk assessment, strategy, all that type of stuff is something that actually we've seen a lot of organizations struggle with, in terms of like what is actually a risk assessment and what should be involved in my sort of risk strategy. And something we've seen some of the organizations we've worked with for this very problem, one of the things that they've done is kind of the reverse, right? So you're talking about, I got to retain Vincent and Elkins or some other law firm to come in and help me respond to these requests and handle all this, and it's super expensive. Well, on the other side, we've actually had some organizations that they hire counsel to work with them when they go through these assessments, CMMC assessments in particular. Mm-hmm. And then we structure the assessment such that it's actually all the work product conducted as part of the assessment, not the output, right? So like the reporting and all that goes to the government side, that is what it is. But internally, the interactions between the customer, between the C3PAO, that's all attorney-client privileged. Mm-hmm. So you have your attorney essentially sits in on all of that activity and kind of sits as like a governor, if you will, that makes sure that everything is conducted appropriately, that information isn't overshared, go on down the list. But it's a risk mitigation strategy, right? It protects you so that if a false claim does come to the forefront and they request all this information, well, you can essentially say we're not providing this because it's under attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, truly, Cole, that's brilliant because, again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? I mean, simply having that engagement to make sure that everything is, well, that you are meeting the legal requirements without under or overstepping, which ostensibly the assessment is fair and equitable, and then they are. But having that privilege in place and having the legal framework in place to help stave off future claims, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I hadn't even thought of that, actually, and so. That's a great tip, by the way. But I did my other legal partners a disservice. So I did a podcast with Zach, and we do a lot of work with Vincent and Elkins, and they're phenomenal lawyers. But I also have other law firms that are equally as good. King and Spalding, we do a lot of work with. They are excellent at this. Debevoise, Plimpton, they're excellent at these. So there are other firms. I didn't want to just focus on D&E. Zach's just at the top of my head because we do a lot of work together. But there are other law firms that can help and specialize in this, and retaining them early. That's a great idea. That's a fantastic idea, rather than get it on the tail end when you don't have a choice, right? So
exactly. And the firm that we work that we've done these type of assessments with is Crowell and Mooring, and we've only conducted one assessment in this sort of arrangement, but there's others out there, and I know they're working with other organizations. And to your point, the whole thing is, it costs more. But man, it's so much less to pay that during your assessment than it is to pay it on the back end and deal with some sort of false claims discovery and all of that. stuff.
Convincing people of that is difficult, but I will tell you, sitting in, because I've seen both sides of the fence, right? I mean, we're in the business of proactively helping folks so they can avoid this, but at the same token, we've seen where legitimate, hardworking people who had no intention of running afoul of a DFARS clause did it, and now they're the subject of a DOJ CID because, and here's the other problem with just not to focus too much on this anymore, but where you sit in an organization sort of, informs your view on the world, right? I call it, I used to use this in one of my talks. If you are scuba diving or you're in a large body of water and you look up, if you've ever been scuba diving, you'll see that because of how light reflects, it's called the manhole effect. Like the sky looks like a perfect circle above you and the light always looks like it's coming in directly over top of you. It's called Snell's window. But that's also happens to people, right? Well, it happens to people defending a network because this is what I see every day, but it happens to people in the job they hold. Like their level of information is what they're experiencing. And they may not have the broader picture, especially when you're talking global companies and big conglomerates. I mean, so a whistleblower who believes they have, evidence of culpability somehow of misdeeds or deliberate willful ignorance of the law or whatever the hell the language is. Oftentimes, like it's just from where they sit, like they don't have the broader view of everything to make that claim, and so I could see where some of these things would be incentivize people to blow the whistle, but they really don't have the full picture. They really don't know the entirety of the environment and who all did what to whom, and you just create this claim. Well, okay, now the company is under duress, and everyone whose livelihood depends on that company is also in duress, for a period of time. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but I think that the DOJ CIDs have an important function, and we need to hold people accountable. I just wish there was a better way to ensure that we're going after real crime and not just an excuse to bludgeon the crap out of people, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. Or like you mentioned, the incentives that people have, right? The whistleblowers have their own incentives. So it could be that sort of manhole effect, which I hadn't thought about that whistleblowers may blow the whistle on something that if they just knew something outside their sort of range of view, then they might have a different take on it, or it might change their perspective and they might not report anything. But the reporting process and everything that comes after it is not designed to provide clarity. It's punitive. So
it is. So I think that if we were going to give advice, and I think you and I are probably on alignment on this, if I were going to advise customers broader than just CMMC, and what we've highlighted here is really important. You have procurement processes that are trying to drive security. And then you have sort of there's civil/criminal over here as retribution for it. And what I would say in a company, especially the large companies that draw the ire of everyone, it's rare that a procurement person in contracting also knows the compliance frameworks, who also knows the security apparatus. I mean, these are usually in separate departments, and it is entirely feasible that someone thinks that. Like they don't even know what the DFARS clause for CSP providers are, right? Mm-hmm. I don't even know what is a FedRAMP. Is this FedRAMP? I don't know, but they wouldn't even know to ask the question, right? I mean, so in some respects, my advice to the greater community is help inform each other. Like your compliance people need to be informed of procurement. Procurement needs to be informed of that, and they need to talk to security people, and everybody has to be aligned because when that SPRS score goes in, it's a no joke. Now it's getting better because the assessments make sure they're valid, but holy crap, I mean it's easy to see how this can get really, really far askew, just because this is nuanced. It really is. I mean, the people who do security may not know the regulatory environment, right? And
100%. Yep. And to your point, it's we say this all the time, and I guess you could argue that we're biased because this is what we do. We help people with this, but again, it goes back to bring an attorney on and pay extra at the beginning to protect you, to put protections in place, or do you pay one on the back end when you're dealing with penalties and all that kind of stuff? It's the same with hiring experts or bringing experts on board. who know these things and can bridge some of those gaps in your organization, right? And can bring understanding to some of that nuance. It's definitely worth, I think it's worth the investment
Mm-hmm.
to do it, especially in, I would say, in larger organizations, where, like you just mentioned, there is like these, these people over here know this and these people over here know that, and maybe they don't necessarily communicate with each other. They kind of do their things in their areas. Whereas like smaller organizations, it's more common to have somebody wear multiple hats and kind of
Right.
actually
Right.
have that knowledge across the board, interestingly. But I think it's kind of that prevention,
Mm-hmm.
just like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I think that's it goes. I think it bears enumerating or articulating, I should say. Even experts consult with other experts. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I call you all the time if I'm like, "Hey, Cole, what do you think about this?" Like, "Hey, I got this situation, and we're not. It's not the same customer base, but like, it's okay to ask experts, right, to get another opinion because there is nuance to this, right? And so it helps to hear someone else's logic about how they would rule on that or how they would defend against that, right? And so I do think that another point we should bring up to our audience is, ask other experts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think another thing that goes unsaid, not everybody who gets a certification has the same experience or knowledge base, right? Um, and I found some people will, that Dunning-Kruger effect. Like I know just enough to think I'm an expert, but enough to know that I'm not an expert. Like
Mm-hmm.
that kind of happens, and we'll hire somebody to help us get through this assessment, but they've never actually done an assessment, or they haven't really they haven't collaborated with it. I mean, so I do think that we need to remind folks that there is a broader community that they can avail themselves of, and they should ask questions and post things on LinkedIn. And God, we have people like Carter Schoenberg and others who are constantly providing good information, and you providing good information. And there's always somebody out there providing really good information for people to digest on the nuance, and they are always willing to answer questions.
Yep.
I've never seen a really good academic question get asked and not like 6 different people cut on there and argue about it, and finally come to a consensus. So I would highly recommend that.
Absolutely. Yep. And then just to slide in real quick. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
please.
something we tell people, and maybe this is a little bit different way of saying it, but to your point, if you're an organization out there that's asking around and maybe looking at bringing on experts or bringing on help, ask them about what are your relationships like with other folks in the marketplace that you guys work in, right? Because most of us are partners, and we look at each other like Terry, you mentioned, you call me up, ask me questions, stuff like that, and vice versa. And you want to have that. You want to have experts that are more than willing to be like, I'm not so sure about this, or I'd like to at least talk to some other folks who maybe experienced this, versus the sort of the folks that are kind of doing it on their own, so to speak, right? And they don't have those relationships, or maybe they haven't developed them yet. But just a question to ask the folks you're potentially thinking about bringing on is, what kind of
Yep.
relationships do you have within the community?
And it's expensive not to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Last question for you, and I apologize because I know we started a little late, but I think this is really good. What are you seeing as far as like there was an early on, most people weren't even passing the scoping call or the preparatory call. Like they weren't even ready to get into assessment, and you guys would do the ethical thing and say, you're not ready, let's shut this down until you are. Are we seeing that trend change? What are you seeing as far as OSCs and their readiness as they come in for assessment?
Great question. And surprisingly, or at least I guess maybe that's a cynical thing to say, but surprisingly, we've seen a lot of improvement
Mm.
in that regard. But it's kind of interesting. So there's been a ton of improvement with folks coming to us and saying, "Hey, we're ready for assessment," and then we're like, "Okay, well, let's start talking about scope and what do you have?" And it's mostly been good to go. We haven't dealt with a lot of issues, but interestingly, when we have folks who come to us and their question is more along the lines of, yeah, I know I need to do this, and they're looking more for help. It's
Mhm.
it's been kind of surprising how much lack of knowledge there still is out there in this space, right? There is just, you would think, like you mentioned, 2018 to 2025, we've been working on this. There's been 1,001 webinars and podcasts like this, and and maybe that's part of the problem, is there's just it's like an echo chamber. There's just too much, and people don't know where to start and what information to go with. But we still see a lot of people not really understanding the basic requirements, what they need to do, just from a CMMC framework perspective. They know they need it. They know it's important. Maybe they know it has 3 levels, but when we get into like the actual requirements, things like that, there's still significant gaps in knowledge we're seeing out there for those that are kind of just getting started with this, which I suppose that makes sense. But on the assessment side, we've definitely seen a vast improvement in preparation. And I know a lot of that comes from folks that have had the time to work with organizations like you guys at CAPE, who build out these environments. And along with building out those environments, you guys are helping them with the process and documentation and answering all these questions and stuff like that. So kudos to you guys. You guys are bringing folks, ready and able to do these assessments right out of the gate. So yeah, on the assessment side, a lot of improvement from a scoping standpoint. Still work to be done. But on the preparation side, definitely a long way to go for a lot of the organizations we work with that are kind of just getting their head wrapped around this.
Yeah, I'd say that on the tail end of that, beware of the snake oil salesman. I don't believe there's really an easy button, as much as there's some competitors out there claiming, we can have you ready in a minute, like 11 hours or 11 minutes, whatever the hell it is. I mean, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And anyone who would prove that solution probably needs to be drummed out of the business too. Are you seeing misrepresentations in the marketplace yet?
I mean, every once in a while, we don't see it as much directly, but we do hear about it, from some of the folks we talk to who maybe have talked to others. Your one size fits all approach comment, I mean, that is, and we tell people that all the time. If you hear that and it's like, man, that seems maybe a little bit too good to be true, the age old advice that, if it sounds like that, it probably is. Definitely is true. Each preparation exercise, each organization should be different. There may be similarities, and there may be, economies of scale we can leverage in, across the board, but there's always going to be something different at every organization, something that needs to be addressed specifically for that particular use case. So, you want to work with somebody who has worked with a lot of different types of businesses and, business operating scenarios, things like that. So that, they're able to address your requirements, or like we mentioned earlier, they can go out and leverage their bench of experts and friends in the ecosystem who can answer some of these questions.
Thanks, Cole. I really, really appreciate you joining me, despite our technical difficulties today. But I do want to just sort of resonate to the audience. Kratos is a phenomenal organization, both to help you before an assessment or if you need an assessment. Kratos is definitely one of the companies out there that we think has a high degree of credibility and professionalism. So I would highly recommend Kratos and having people call you Cole if they do need those functions. It's always great and a pleasure to work with you. Your information and insights are really, really valuable. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry, for having me on, and appreciate the kind words. And I would direct those right back to you guys over at CAPE. You guys do great work with your customers, and especially, getting them ready for assessments and building out these environments. We've really enjoyed working with you guys, and I know we got additional environments to come, so we're looking forward to those as well.
Likewise. Thanks again, Cole.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry.